The incident involving Hayim Cohen, a 38-year-old adoptive father from Houston, Texas, is one that initially appeared to be a heartwarming story of a single father raising 9 adopted sons. However, it unraveled into a horrifying situation of long-term sexual abuse. Hayim Nissim Cohen presented himself as Jewish and gained recognition for his unique family situation. Cohen maintained an active presence on social media, sharing stories and images of his life with his adopted sons. He even appeared on local news segments, portraying the image of a loving father dedicated to providing a home for children in need. He claimed to have health issues, often appearing in public using a wheelchair and oxygen tanks. This narrative of resilience and selflessness endeared him to many in the community and on social media platforms. On the surface, his entire story seemed like nothing short of inspirational. Cohen homeschooled the children and spoke about the joys and challenges of raising a large family. He emphasized the importance of giving children a loving home and often discussed his Jewish faith as a guiding principle in his life and parenting. However, this carefully constructed public image would eventually be revealed as a facade, concealing a much darker reality. Fast forward to February of 2023, a 17-year-old boy made an anonymous call to a podcast using a burner phone and Wi-Fi to avoid detection. This call would prove to be the turning point in exposing the alleged years of abuse within the Cohen household. During the podcast, the teen revealed shocking details about his life under Cohen's care. He described years of sexual abuse, which he explicitly termed as stating that it had begun shortly after his adoption at a young age. The boy's decision to reach out to a podcast rather than traditional authorities highlighted both his desperation and the fear that had been instilled in him over the years. The podcast host, recognizing the severity of the situation, immediately contacted law enforcement. This then set into motion a chain of events that would lead to Cohen's arrest and the subsequent revelation that his public persona was all fake. On February 3rd, 2023, just 2 days after the initial disclosure, Hayim Cohen was arrested and charged with continuous sexual abuse of a child and sexual assault of a person under 17 years old. These initial charges were based on the allegations made during the podcast call. The investigation involved collaboration between multiple agencies. The Houston Police Department took the lead, but they worked closely with Child Protective Services and the Harris County District Attorney's Office. The investigation faced several significant challenges. The long-term nature of the alleged abuse, spanning many years, made it difficult to gather physical evidence for older incidents. With 7 complainants ranging in age from 8 to 18, investigators had to carefully manage multiple narratives and experiences. The fact that 8 previous CPS investigations had failed to uncover the abuse complicated matters, and investigators had to determine why these earlier inquiries were unsuccessful. Cohen's carefully crafted public image as a devoted father may have initially made some skeptical of the allegations. As the investigation progressed, its scope rapidly expanded. Within 24 hours of Cohen's initial arrest, 8 new charges were filed based on allegations from 5 additional adopted sons. This quick expansion suggested that once the initial arrest was made, other victims felt safer coming forward. The investigation also had to expand to include the allegations against Avshalom Cohen, the eldest adopted son, who was later arrested for allegedly assaulting his younger siblings. While CPS had been involved in previous investigations that failed to uncover the alleged abuse, this time around, they removed 6 children from the home and placed them in foster care. Eventually, it was realized that Hayim Cohen had faced previous accusations of a similar nature. In 2019, Cohen was charged with indecency with a minor, a serious allegation that stemmed from an incident involving a foreign exchange student from Spain who was living in his home. This case marked the first publicly known legal action against Cohen for misconduct. According to court records and a civil lawsuit filed later, the foreign exchange student, who was 15 years old when he arrived at Cohen's home in September 2018, reported abuse to staff at Sharpstown High School in Houston in April 2019. The student alleged that Cohen had abused his position of authority as a host parent to manipulate and coerce him into explicit activities. Despite the severity of the charge, he was released on bond, allowing him to return home, where he continued to care for his adopted sons. Given the 2019 charges and the multiple CPS investigations, serious questions arise about how Cohen was able to adopt 9 children. The adoption process typically involves rigorous background checks and home studies to ensure the safety and well-being of the children being placed. Another aspect of Cohen's history of allegations involves claims about his health status. According to court records and testimony from his adopted sons, Cohen appears to have exaggerated or fabricated health issues, possibly as a means of garnering sympathy or avoiding scrutiny. Specific claims include reports that Cohen used a wheelchair and oxygen tanks in public or when visitors were present, but not when alone with his sons. He allegedly had 6 oxygen tanks that he didn't actually use. One of his sons claimed that Cohen's uncontrollable coughing only occurred in court settings. If convicted on all or most charges, Cohen could face a substantial prison sentence. In Texas, continuous abuse of a minor carries a minimum sentence of 25 years to life in prison. Multiple convictions could result in effectively a life sentence given Cohen's age. According to the National Child Abuse and Neglect Data System, in 2020, Florida had nearly 300,000 referrals for abuse and neglect, which equates to about 69 per 1,000 children. The most common perpetrator of these cases is the child's own parents, accounting for 74% of cases in Florida. This statistic aligns with the case in question, where the parents were the alleged abusers. In May 2022, a deeply disturbing case just like this shocked the community of Polk County, Florida. The incident involved the death of an unnamed 2-year-old girl who was found in a severely malnourished state, weighing only 9.5 pounds at the time of her death. This event unfolded in Davenport and quickly drew national attention due to the horrific nature of the child's suffering and death. The victim was born on July 25, 2019. At the time of her death on May 10, 2022, she was nearly 3 years old. On the morning of May 10, 2022, at approximately 11:13 a.m., Polk County Sheriff's Office received a call from 57-year-old Regis Johnson, the child's father. Johnson reported that his young daughter was not breathing. When first responders arrived at the scene, they found the toddler unresponsive in an inflatable pool that was being used as a makeshift playpen inside the family's residence. Despite immediate efforts to resuscitate her, the child was pronounced dead at the scene. Back to that detail about the child being underweight. To put this into perspective, the average weight for a healthy 3-year-old girl is typically anywhere from 33 to 40 pounds. The child's appearance was described as bone and skin by County Sheriff Grady Judd. An autopsy was conducted to determine the cause and manner of death. The medical examiner's findings were grim. The child had died from long-term starvation. The autopsy revealed that the toddler had 0 food in her stomach at the time of her death, indicating that she had not been fed for a significant period. Furthermore, between her last recorded doctor's visit in January 2020 and her death in May 2022, the child had only gained 1 ounce in weight. However, the effects of the extreme neglect from the child's piece of parents were not limited to just weight. Her cognitive and language development were also said to be severely impaired. According to reports, she could not talk at an age when most children are forming sentences and asking questions. This aligns with research findings that neglected children often show more severe cognitive and academic deficits compared to other forms of maltreatment. Language development is particularly vulnerable to neglect. Children who experience severe neglect often show delays in language acquisition and usage. This is partly due to the lack of stimulation and interaction that is crucial for language development in early childhood. On May 11, 2022, the day after the child was found deceased, Regis Johnson, 57, and arhonda Tillman, 35, were arrested. They were initially charged with 1 count each of aggravated child abuse. Simultaneously, a third individual, Frank Robinson, 64, was also arrested. Robinson, who is Johnson's brother and the child's uncle, was charged with negligent child abuse and failure to report child abuse. His arrest stemmed from the fact that he lived in the same house and was allegedly aware of the abuse but never reported it to authorities. Following their arrests, Johnson and Tillman were booked into the Polk County Jail. Given the severity of the charges and the circumstances of the case, they were held without bond. As the investigation progressed and more details about the child's condition came to light, the charges against Johnson and Tillman were upgraded. On May 27, 2022, a Polk County grand jury indicted both Johnson and Tillman on first-degree murder charges. Joseph Paul Franklin, born on April 13, 1950 in Mobile, Alabama, emerged from a troubled childhood to become one of America's most notorious racist serial killers. His early life was marked by poverty, abuse, and a gradual descent into extremist ideologies that would ultimately fuel his violent crimes. He was the eldest of 4 children born to James Clayton Vaughn Sr. and Helen Vaughn. His father, a World War II veteran who worked as a butcher, struggled with alcoholism and was often absent from the family home. When present, Vaughn Sr. was known to be physically abusive towards his children, creating fear and instability within the household. Furthermore, the family struggled financially, with Franklin later claiming that he was rarely given enough to eat during his childhood. Franklin's mother, Helen, was described as a strict German-American woman. Her German heritage would later play a significant role in shaping Franklin's ideological development. As a boy, Franklin discovered photographs of his German relatives wearing the armbands during World War III, which sparked his interest in their ideology. The environment in which Franklin grew up was steeped in the racial tensions of the segregated South. While he later claimed that his parents were not any more racist than most other people in Mobile during the 50s and 60s, he noted that the use of racial slurs was commonplace. As a teenager, he initially showed an interest in evangelical Christianity. However, this interest was short-lived and soon gave way to an obsession with He began immersing himself in racist literature, practicing salutes, and even sewing their iconography onto his clothing. This shift marked the beginning of Franklin's descent into extremism. In 1967, at the age of 17, Franklin took his first step into organized white supremacy by joining the American Party. He sent in the $2 membership fee, officially aligning himself with the group. This was a pivotal year for the party as its founder, George Lincoln Rockwell, was assassinated by a disgruntled follower. Despite this setback, Franklin recalled that the party remained fairly strong at the time. Over the next few years, Franklin's involvement in white supremacist circles deepened. He claimed to have been a member of various extremist groups, including the though he stated that he left after just 3 months because there were more police informants under the sheets than real members. This experience may have contributed to his later decision to act as a lone wolf rather than as part of an organized group. As Franklin's views solidified, he began to see himself as a soldier in a coming race war. He later stated that he was inspired by Charles Manson, noting that many people like himself looked up to Charles Manson. Manson's vision of an apocalyptic race war, which he called Helter Skelter, seems to have resonated with Franklin and influenced his later actions. Joseph Franklin's criminal career began in the mid-1970s and escalated rapidly into a series of violent, racially motivated attacks that spanned multiple states. His approach was characterized by careful planning, mobility, and a determination to target individuals based on race, religion, and interracial relationships. Franklin's initial crimes were relatively minor compared to his later ones. In 1976, he stalked and attacked an interracial couple with mace in Maryland. This incident, while not resulting in fatalities, served as a teaser of the violence to come and demonstrated Franklin's growing obsession with interracial relationships. As Franklin's ideology became more extreme, so did his crimes. Between 1977 and 1980, he embarked on a killing spree that would claim the lives of 15 people across 11 states, though he later claimed responsibility for up to 22 murders. His victims were primarily Black and Jewish individuals, but also included romantic partners who happened to be white. Franklin typically used a rifle to attack his victims from a distance. To fund his life of crime, Franklin resorted to various criminal activities. He committed at least 16 bank robberies across the country, using the money to finance his travels and purchase weapons and supplies. Additionally, Franklin regularly sold his plasma at blood banks, which provided him with a steady stream of income. This practice would later contribute to his capture, as his distinctive tattoos made him recognizable to blood bank staff. He often staked out locations in advance, choosing vantage points that offered clear lines of sight to his intended targets while providing cover for his escape. For instance, before his attack on Vernon Jordan in Fort Wayne, Indiana, Franklin spent time observing the Marriott Hotel where Jordan was staying, identifying potential positions to hide out. Disguise and anonymity were crucial elements of Franklin's strategy. He frequently changed his appearance, using aliases and dyeing his hair to avoid detection. Franklin was known to use at least 18 different aliases during his crime spree, making it challenging for law enforcement to establish connections between his various crimes. Franklin's first major attack occurred in late July 1977 with the firebombing of Beth Shalom Synagogue in Chattanooga, Tennessee. In August of the same year, Franklin killed an interracial couple, Alphonse Manning Jr. and Tony Schwen, in a parking lot in Madison, Wisconsin. 2 months later, he killed a Jewish man named Gerald Gordon and wounded 2 others outside the Brith Shalom Knesset Israel congregation in Richmond Heights, Missouri. The next year, in early March, Franklin shot and paralyzed Hustler magazine publisher Larry Flint in Lawrenceville, Georgia. He later confessed to this crime, claiming it was retaliation for Hustler publishing interracial pornography. 2 years later, in August 1980, he killed 2 black men, Ted Fields and David Martin, who were jogging with white women near Liberty Park in Salt Lake City, Utah. This crime again highlighted Franklin's hatred of interracial relationships. These crimes are only some of the more notorious instances in Joseph Franklin's crime spree. Franklin's reign of terror came to an end on October 28, 1980, when he was arrested in Lakeland, Florida. The events leading to Franklin's arrest began when technicians at a blood donation facility in Lakeland recognized him from an alert of Franklin's criminal status. They promptly notified authorities, who quickly moved to apprehend the notorious killer. Franklin's capture marked the beginning of a lengthy legal process that would unfold across several jurisdictions over the next 3 decades. Throughout his various trials, Franklin's behavior in court was often erratic and inflammatory. He frequently made racist statements and showed little remorse for his actions. However, his willingness to talk about his crimes also provided investigators with valuable information that helped to solve numerous cold cases. Franklin's legal proceedings were complicated by questions about his mental state. During some of his trials, defense attorneys argued that Franklin suffered from paranoid schizophrenia and was unfit to stand trial. These claims led to extensive psychological evaluations and debates about Franklin's competency to face legal proceedings. In addition to the murder charges, Franklin also faced legal consequences for numerous other crimes, including multiple bank robberies that he had committed to finance his killing spree. As the years passed and Franklin remained in custody, he began to show signs of change in his ideological stance. In his later years on death row, Franklin claimed to have renounced his racist views, stating that he had come to see his former beliefs as illogical and partly a consequence of his abusive upbringing. Franklin's final legal battle centered around his execution in Missouri. In the days leading up to his scheduled execution, there were last-minute legal challenges regarding Missouri's new lethal injection protocol. These challenges led to brief stays of execution, but they were quickly overturned, and the U.S. Supreme Court ultimately rejected Franklin's final appeals. On November 20th, 2013, Joseph Paul Franklin was executed by lethal injection at the Eastern Reception Diagnostic and Correctional Center in Bonne Terre, Missouri. The execution began at 6:07 a.m. and he was pronounced dead at 6:17 a.m.